All personnel, including D-Class and non-hostile SCPs, are to be discharged. Control over Foundation sites is to be handled via AI-AD systems. Any remaining projects, documents, and research initiatives are now terminated. The Veil Protocol is null and void. SCP-001 has occurred. To every last one of you, I say this. It has been an honor. Spend what little time you have left well. You know, that's awfully ominous, and it makes me wonder if SCP-001 is maybe just the friends we make along the way. SCP Cafe Recap 2019 Week 30. I'm your host, Blue Soul, SCP Wiki moderator, chat operator, subreddit moderator, author, loving husband, dog petter, Cologne aficionado, Tottenham Hotspur supporter, and man of few words, so let's get into it. I actually don't have a whole lot else to talk about this week. So we only had 7 skips this week. Typically, weeks are like between 12 and 16, 17 skips. We had 6 last week, 7 this week. The leading theory is everybody's on vacation. That makes sense to me, and we are going to do this week's show just a little bit differently. I have 4 of these that I'm going to do proper recaps on. I'm going to offer critique on 3, and I have one other tale that I want to make mention of. So without further ado, let's get into it. SCP-4702, Gehenna, Unknown to Man, by Mini-Meats. We have an object class of safe and an image of a what looks to be a 3-story manor house, quite large with trees in the front. This image is desaturated. It's in grayscale, and it's got a tinge of green to the whole thing. The caption reads, Manor Exterior of SCP-4702-A. The procedures are minimal. The building containing -A and its associated grounds have been purchased by the Foundation and enclosed within perimeter fencing. The interior parlor room containing -A has been walled off with the exception of a pneumatically sealed door to facilitate Foundation access. And that's it. The description indicates that 4702 itself is an extra-dimensional anomaly made of 2 components, -A, which is a fireplace, and facade, both of which are constructed of beryllium bronze. On the outermost layer is an effigy with a bovine head and outstretched arms. There are numerous intricate filigree patterns on all layers of the casing, very advanced, showing a high level of artistic talent. It includes occult, alchemical, and religious iconography. The interior of the fireplace is accessed via a narrow slotted opening on the abdomen, and this allows for the deposit of combustible materials and tending of the fire. Once a fire has been ignited within this fireplace, the layers of the casing react in order to project a shadow play upon the walls of the parlor, and this is a very exact sort of production that it puts on. The shadows, despite flames being somewhat random, they put out this shadow play that's apparently very easy to discern and understand that is in fact what's going on. So if this shadow play is allowed to complete, it takes about 18 minutes. The mechanisms within this outer casing of the fireplace will reconfigure themselves and allow access to a passageway within, designated as -B. This -B opens into an extra-dimensional space, approximating a river valley, but it doesn't correspond to any known geography. Upon transitioning into this extra-dimensional space, subjects have all their personal belongings vanish, including their clothing, with the exception of a stone mask, and we have images to the right of this, the passage, which it does appear to be sort of a hole inside a hearth or a fireplace, and that caption reads, Passage accessed via -A, and then the mask underneath it, which is a sort of a gray, simple eye slits and mouth, looks to be made of stone, and that caption reads, Approximation of the masks worn by MTF. The mask is apparently unable to be removed, but upon exiting Dash B, subjects will appear as they did prior to entry. Within Dash B, the sky is predominantly black, but separated into two major regions. The area behind Dash B lightens to a pale yellow. The area in front of it continues to darken until it becomes void of all light. And unfortunately, due to the nature of this demanifestation of your clothes and everything, that means no recording equipment. So we go into a couple of what are basically positioned as narrative after-action logs from an operative from MTF Zeta 9 Mole Rats, who was had a team sent into this Dash B. We set up this log in that 4 operatives went in. After 42 hours, only one came out. Michelle Wilkes reemerged with all of her personal equipment. During the debriefing, we came to fully understand the complications with exploring Dash B, and we let Agent Wilkes pen her own report about her experiences. Now, this initial after-action report is quite lengthy, and it is quite heavy on the prose, which is iffy because we have these MTFs that are, we're very used to them being rough and tumble, cut and dried, get in, get out, describe what you see, stick to the facts, just the facts, etc. And that we sort of contrast that with what we have here is interesting. I feel that it was intentional because of kind of my experience with mini-meats and their abilities, that this is, I think what we're trying to convey here is that it was such an experience that they are sort of forced, they're compelled to write about it in a bit more of a purpley sort of prose. What I'm going to do is give a more prosaic recounting of their story here. She initially recalls a childhood memory of nearly drowning in a riptide, and describes how the weight of the water crushed and drowned her as she sank into the hopeless blackness of the abyss, and she has nightmares about it, ever since, and she chewed up awake just as soon as the last of the light finally faded in the nightmare. And that was reminiscent of her experience in this tunnel that we call Dash B, that was very constricted and had to crouch very low and then crawl and then on her belly for the last several meters until it ended and gave way to the river valley, and that the team had really no time to process what was going on. All of a sudden, they were stripped of all their clothing and equipment, and their faces were covered in heavy, uncomfortable, clammy masks. And almost immediately, they were almost overpowered by a very foul smell, an acrid, fetid aroma, in her words, that stung their eyes and lungs with each breath. The kind of sour, horrific rot that makes your gut retch and heave. And there's a good bit of descriptive language here. It took us nearly 20 minutes to clean off our vomit and become accustomed to the smell to carry on, although it never quite went away. It wasn't easy to expel all of that vomit through the mouth of the mask, but we had little choice. I like that. That was a line that really stuck out to me as quality. The team forges on, noting the sky is getting deeper and darker. They note large monoliths shooting up at uneven angles made of black stone, and they provide sort of a natural path to explore deeper. The monoliths were described as rounded, twisting things that radiate a strange heat, warm without being hot, but uncomfortable to the touch. And the MTF is still trying to be precise, keeping only one arm's length from each other, checking in verbally every 30 seconds or so. But as they kept going, the minutes turn into hours turn into more hours. They stop talking to each other. The check-ins stop happening. The heat made them sweat. Dirt caked on their bodies. Nobody was worried about the fact that they had no water, no provisions. And finally, they note the presence of water. The monoliths begin to narrow, and it was a tricky route to the edge of the water, but they arrive at a bank all the same. A few meters before they got to the water itself, the huge stones stop and gave way to the faint glow of soft flickering orange and red light on the opposite bank. And as bad as the smell's been up to this point, it is far worse at the water, such that they can't actually get to the water because the smell's so damn bad. They describe the surface as oily and noted shapes forming, surfacing, and going back under. Faces, hands and arms, corpses, insects, vermin, and so on. River of disease and filth. And all around them, they begin to notice people just like them, caked in dirt and grime and naked save for these masks. Some of them are, kneeling in a prostrate position with their foreheads touching the ground. Others with their heads wrenched back, arms outstretched to the sky, screaming at the void. Others are just weeping, sobbing in a heap with their head in their hands. And some among them had a thick, oily sludge on their bodies as if they'd submerged themselves in the river. Most of them only went part of the way up their calves or maybe up to their forearms. A brave or perhaps foolish few were covered up to their torsos or necks. And she asked what would possess someone to do that. And the colleagues of hers looked on in silence as they tried to process all of these people waiting on the bank. Wilkes notes a woman white-haired and very old with sludge coating her hands and arms about halfway up her bicep. She kneels beside her and asked her to tell Wilkes her name, and she lifted her frail body, and her lips moved beneath her mask, and she spoke in a cold, raspy tone. Her gnarled hand grabbed Wilkes by the ankle, and Wilkes shot up and tried to pull back. Her grip was too strong, and she said, "We must wait." There was hopelessness beneath her words. It would have really scared the hell out of her if the shock of the grip hadn't already done so. And Wilkes nodded, hoping that would be enough to get her to let go, and it was. And her ankle was smeared with whatever is in that water, but otherwise fine, and she ran. And nobody tried to stop her. She didn't think of the rest of the MTF. She made it all the way back to the portal, and they found... she notes that the MTF, the rest of them, had found their place where they were meant to wait, just as Wilkes had been shown hers. But she was the only one gutless enough to run away from it, and now Wilkes has to live, and we end this log. We go into a second log where this is sort of an exploration mission that includes... basically, its purpose is to retrieve our remaining 3 agents, but also to do some further exploration, and Wilkes was allowed to return due to her familiarity with the region, along with her potential value as an asset for getting the marooned personnel back out. Wilkes ends up taking the lead on this second expedition, more or less by default, as the MTF captain didn't feel quite as brave as they otherwise would have, stark naked and without any weapons or much of anything aside from these masks. The process goes much the same. The smell is as it ever was. They get sick from it. They have the same issues with initially checking in and it, growing silent with time. And they make their way to the river. And the MTF agents that were left behind are exactly where they were. They were in the same place that they had been. Tears streaming down their masks, forced to wail and sob through those tiny slits over the nose and mouth for what must have been days until the MTF, until this new group came back. And she notes, "It was exquisite this place could make them feel so keenly. There would be time to wax about that later. I pointed out those I'd marooned. The MTF commanding officer pulled herself together long enough to organize an extraction. The 6 other members were ready to leave, and Wilkes told them to go, and that she would follow right behind. The commander had to have seen it in her eyes that she was lying, but let Wilkes go through with it all the same. The others made their way back out, arm around arm, carrying each other, and headed back toward the portal. Wilkes approaches the bank. The old woman was still there, and Wilkes knew what she needed to do. She needed to cross the river to see the other shore, understand this light, needs to know with every fiber of her soul, and it's only because of such great conviction that she was able to force herself to climb down the bank and wades into the murk until she couldn't touch the bottom and began to sink. And thick as the river was, the swimming was very taxing, and her arms tire quickly. She loses sight of the bank from which she'd left. The shore that she was destined for, however, did not come into view. Things under the water bumped against her, not fish, not plants, but things with anatomy she dares not imagine with her waking mind. Long, bony fingers brushing against me, caressing me, supporting me. Or at least she felt they were, until her strength wavered too far and began to sink beneath the surface. Black, briny muck climbing further and further up the mask as she bobbles beneath the waves in a panic. Into her mouth, her nose covering her eyes. And she notes she could feel the last biting touch of the air on her skin before her hand disappeared beneath. She just totally submerged. Notes it was warm and quiet, a thrumming heartbeat instead of a rushing current that wanted to welcome me to an eternity in that blackness, and she wanted to say yes. She wanted to curl up and drift away and swallow all of her sins so they could carry her to the bottom where she belonged. But before she could rest, she had to know just one more thing. She pulled herself up toward the surface with one last desperate lunge, fingernails dug deeply into chalky earth. She pulls herself onto the shore, chest heaving, burping and coughing up tar. Somehow she'd crossed, but could offer no explanation how, as she'd covered a lot of distance while trying her very best to drown. In front of her, everything was different. The desolation is replaced by a bank that is alive and writhing, cancerous and grotesque. Ropes of flesh and trees of sinew and meat lit at their base as shallow pits of fire burned, belching smoke and the sickly sweet scent of some kind of incense. There was nothing else for me there, just an empty shoreline and hellfire. It's what awaits us all, desolation. And she closes this with, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry that I caused all of this. I'll accept whatever reprimand. I deserve it, and so much more." Now, we have one last collapsible that indicates it is for level 4 personnel, and it says that after the events in that second log, an interview was requested, and this was between Agent Wilkes and research lead Dr. Baus, and we have a transcript, and this is where we close the article out, and Baus is a bit put out because Wilkes has been playing quite hard to get, and been trying to get them to sort of give an accounting of what exactly is going on in their interview, and notes they find the report incomplete and want to know if they deliberately omitted material or intentionally truncated the log, because it's not their decision to decide what is and isn't relevant to the anomaly. And when Wilkes asks why the doctor would think that, we sort of call back to just how purple the prose is in the first two logs, and he says, well, for starters, you have no problems waxing poetic about your journey every step of the way until you touch the far bank. You use dramatic language, you share vivid imagery, and then your entire experience on the far shore is boiled down to one paragraph of, "There was nothing, and then I left," to paraphrase. And Wilkes says, "But you're asking me to prove a negative." Bao says that I don't believe you that it is a negative. I don't buy it, and I'm running out of patience. You know damn well we can extract the information we need. I'd really rather not risk the permanent damage to your cognition. You have a bright future, and I don't want to torpedo both your career and your brain on the same day. And Wilkes caves and says that she thought if she made something up that fit, it would all go away, that she'd never have to go back there or talk about it again, and if you ever did send someone else, they might be brave enough or stupid enough to get you the info you need. Yes, it was a lie, but a well-intentioned one, and I hope you know that. And Baus, is compassionate in this moment and says, I want to believe you, but I can't until I hear the whole story and understand why you falsified the report. And Wilkes nods and says, well, I crossed the river as I described. It's all true until I clawed my way on shore. But there wasn't anything so simple and comprehensible as flesh and fire. There was an empty space and then a Christmas tree. And Wilkes explains it was the exact tree they had at their childhood home, and that she'd recognize the angel on the top anywhere, and begins recounting a story that they had at a young age, that they were trying to fix the angel on top of the tree. They climbed on top of her dad's recliner. She was trying to do that and slipped, fell off the side, and pulled the angel off the tree, crushed it. Her little brother runs in, came right up to me, and her mom came in and blamed the little brother, and didn't understand. The little brother doesn't understand why why his sister would betray him like that. Her mom takes the little brother into the kitchen, and she can hear more than one smack. Dad could get really mean. He had a real problem back then. And she sits there as the yelling gets louder, then quieter, and then Dad and the little brother came in. Dad asked if I did it, and I shook my head no. He asked again in that voice, the voice all dads get when you know they're ready to put the fear of God into you if you say the wrong thing. And this time she nods yes. So Dad puts little brother down, grabs her by the arm, hauls her through the kitchen, opened the cellar door, took her downstairs, and ordered me on one of the shop chairs that he kept down there. Says, Shelley, I'm disappointed in you beyond words, and so is your brother. You've ruined Christmas. Stay put until I come and get you. So she's in the cellar while they're all eating. Her brother asked where she was. She could overhear that. And Dad says that she'd been real mean and naughty, and Santa had to make some changes to his list. The sadness turned to chatter and then to laughter. After dinner, they opened presents, and I guess the little brother got most of hers. Some of them confused him real good, I'm pretty sure, but that's what Dad said. They were his now. And recounts that she'll never forget how alien she felt in her own home. Can you imagine being 10 and being told you ruined Christmas? Do you know how unloved and forgotten and worthless I was made to feel, and what a shitty thing I did to deserve that punishment? To my own brother, from my own dad. Hours and hours passed, and it was completely dark in that basement, save for the dim light from the kitchen at the top of the steps. Finally, Dad trudged down to come and get me. Stood next to the chair and just pointed upstairs, didn't say a word. Michelle goes straight to bed, cries herself to sleep. The next morning, I woke up, and I did it all again. So, she is experiencing this moment, this day, in a loop on the other side of this bank, and notes that she could count them, notes that she needed to feel that guilt, at least on some level. She started counting them, and gets to 30 before she broke down and couldn't remind herself anymore, but still kept waking up to Christmas. At some point, I started counting again after a while. I don't know how many days I missed in between. It was my own personal Groundhog Day. I got to 1,114 before it stopped. And Bouse asked, how did it stop? Did you do something different? Did you break the loop? She goes, I couldn't tell you. But the truth is, she was dragged out of the river. The decrepit old woman from before, the one that nearly crushed my ankle, she had a hold of me again and was dragging me out. Actually not sure if she ever even crossed the river at all, and perhaps it's for the best that she doesn't know. Then I rolled over, puking my guts up and spilling that blackened bile and putrid tar all over the chalky dirt, and asked her why. Why did you save me? And without any change in expression, she glares down at her. We wait. We wait for judgment. She said, when I felt strong enough, I got up and came back to the portal. She let me go without a fuss. I think she knew I'd be back. And Bao says, you intend to return? She says, no, not in this lifetime, if I have any say in it. What I felt in that tunnel as I entered the anomaly, that crushing blackness that enveloped me and cut me off from all light and all hope, I felt that same thing again in the river. It was as if everything good and right and pure was 10 million miles away and lost to me forever, denied to me completely. For the simple cruelties that I've maliciously and willfully inflicted on my brothers, my family, my friends, myself. For everything that I've done up to this point, I know there's a circle of stone on that riverbank where I'll be waiting. I deserve nothing less. I did this to myself. Bao says, I understand this is a lot. Take your time, but I do have to ask if there's anything else you can tell us. And she says, no. I just want to be alone for a while. I have some thinking to do. End article. So we're going to take a brief detour for a history lesson here. Gehenna is a real place, as we alluded to in the title, Gehenna Unknown to Man. It's a valley in Jerusalem, in the Bible, it is stated that this was where the kings of Judah sacrificed their children by fire, and they talk about this at length in Jeremiah chapter 7, and the idea is that Gehenna is a cursed place. It is cursed by God and hell on earth. So we can take the title and take what we've got in the logs, and we can infer that 4702 is hell or something approaching it. And Mini Meats does confirm this in the author notes, the author post. This is sort of a different sort of take on hell and what the experience may be like for somebody. And I think that's pretty powerful, having to, they're waiting for judgment, and until then, if they try to force the issue, they simply live through their worst moments over and over. That was very horrifying. This piece is fairly new. It only came out on Wednesday. It was the last one in on selection day, and I find it underrated right now at plus 25. The purple prose in the logs is it's interesting, because where it initially felt like she was being maybe compelled to do it, as we find out in that third log, that's not really the case. It was more, we have something to point at afterwards to say, well, we've got a difference in style here, and it's still used within the story as, something changed in your tone. I think you're holding out information on us. So it still serves a purpose. I don't know if it is, it's one way you can do it. I'm okay with it, but only just. It is not something that I think really fits the overall vibe that we've put out there with what to expect from an MTF log. And that is, it's a challenge. I don't think it really hurts the piece, given that the overall quality of it is still quite good. There's good imagery throughout. The stone masks are a good touch. The naked, save for this mask, and even the invented far side of this mound of living, writhing flesh and smoke and incense is very very compelling, and that's something that's done really well throughout this piece. It is quite heavy on the logs. That was one thing I wanted to talk about. This shadow play. I feel like maybe I'm not getting what it's supposed to do, because it feels like we basically add 2 paragraphs to the description, and given that we don't ever explain what the shadow play is or what it's about, it lacks any sort of punch, because we just have this thing, well, this is the mechanism with which to open this, but does it really matter? Not that, of course it matters, because that's how the thing activates, but we didn't ask how that works, and the fact that we didn't get any explanation on what the shadow play is about, or if it's always the same thing, that sort of description might give us we might be able to foreshadow something. We might be able to do something interesting with that. But as it is, we have this section of the description that doesn't really match up with the rest of the work in any way that I can really note. So that's one thing to maybe consider. Overall, though, this has been good, and it's been really well received. At plus 25, I think it's a bit underrated, but it's also quite new and basically just suffers from a lack of eyes. So this was a solid +1. I did really like the piece. Well done, Mini Meats. Moving on, SCP-4982, titled Heavy Lies the Crown by Uncle Nicolini. This has an object class of safe and no image, but a fanciful sort of green text box just a little ways down. we have just one or two sentences worth of procedures. It's kept in a high-security isolation chamber, accessible to level 4 personnel and above, outfitted with a surveillance system, and due to the self-containing nature of -1 instances, no additional procedures are necessary. So it is described as a modified 4-shelf mahogany bookcase in French Revival style. Each level is engraved with, from bottom to top, id, ego, mor, and deus, and smaller engravings identify their contents over each -1 instance. A large green carving is affixed to the top center arch of this bookcase, and we have the following as a computer-generated replication. It is dark green with like a forest green with gold filigree around the edges and an insignia in the center also made of gold. And it says, "Heavy lies the crown of knowledge, bringing naught but misery. These tomes we cast to the darkness, never to harm the garden." So the -1 designation refers to 13 pieces of documentation. Each instance possesses individual anomalous properties, and there are 4 of them on each shelf, except for the topmost, in which there is only 1. When a document is removed from the bookshelf, all shelves, except for the one disturbed, will shut, and once shut, the compartments do not open until the instance is put back. And if an instance is moved more than 2 meters from this bookcase, it will disappear and manifest back where it belongs. And the remainder of the work is a list of the items on each shelf and their identification plaque. So what follows is a smorgasbord of links to other groups of interest. We have the Black Queen featured in Our Best Life, which is a 100-page plastic-bound photo memory album titled Dad and Me, and on the rear cover on the inside is marked AC. And this instance is missing pictures, but all images consistently depict an adult male and a younger female, and when touched, these photos animate and play a brief loop of interactions. And we do note each of these has an anomalous sort of phenomenon about it, and that is listed in the notes of each one. The Black Vault, which is directions on FBI letterhead to a meatpacking plant in Chicago, contained in an envelope stamped classified, and we sweep the location and found a hidden vault door in the basement level from which jazz and ragtime music can sometimes be heard playing within. This door has resisted, I should say, all breaching attempts to date. The Tome of Cosmic Madness, which is star signals, and we crosslink 1425 right there. This is more or less the nature of the rest of the work. We have one written entirely in emoji, which is presumably a 2521 related sort of deal. We have stuff for, referencing Wondertainment, GOC, just pretty much if you like something within the SCP universe, it's probably in here. At the top shelf is a plaque reading Godhood, and it is brown leather binding. The spine and front cover are titled How to Write a Story, and the notes here say that all pages of the document appear to have been removed prior to containment. And we end the article here. So what we have is a thing that we stole or somehow got from the Serpent's Hand that indicates that they're basically making these GOIs somebody else's problem. This is, this is pleasing, rewarding to people that are really into Foundation lore, that really get into the GOIs and, into the deep reading, beyond the most easily recognizable of skips. But as a main lister, as something in an SCP slot, I don't feel anything at all reading this. There's really not much outside of the little nod at the end that Godhood is being an author, which I'm, it's maybe a romantic notion, but truth be told, the thing is a little too meta and a little too just a little too self-serving to the Foundation universe, for my taste. We don't really do anything here, and that makes it hard for me to give this a positive rating. We bring all of these different GOIs into a single place, and then we don't do anything at all to move along any sort of story or motivation or much of anything with any of them. I find this whole thing to be kind of a missed opportunity, and this one's a no vote from me. This is the second highest rated skip of the week, but it really doesn't do it for me. There's nothing wrong with it from a writing perspective, but it doesn't strike my fancy from a main lister perspective, so it is a no vote from me. Moving on, SCP-4878, titled 6-Foot Soldiers by Werilium. We have an object class of safe and an image of a cockroach, and it reads, a cockroach affected by SCP-4878. The procedures are one sentence. It is kept in Site-119 within an item locker equipped with a Faraday cage. And it's described as a small 35 centimeter long ovoid metallic signaling device that influences cockroach behavior. It emits several overlapping radio frequencies that have an anomalous effect on cockroaches within about 700 meters radius. These cockroaches will form a large swarm and will undergo temporary physical and social changes, including an enhanced metabolism, increased hostility to non-cockroaches, and a greatly reduced aversion to light. They'll move cohesively as a single unit following food. A small number of cockroaches in the swarm will carry this signaling device such that it remains close to the center of the swarm, and cockroaches affected by it will also attempt to eat anything in their path. And if they can't chew through it, they will try to destroy it using their collective mass. But notably, they will not harm humans, even in self-defense. We've opened this thing up, this signaling device, and found a radio transmitter with an electronic controller, a miniaturized radioisotope thermoelectric generator, presumably our power source, a receiver, and a living human brain suspended in a clear gel-filled container laser engraved with a logo similar to that of the Foundation's. I would have liked to have seen a logo here. If we're going to say it's similar, that piques my interest, and I'd like to know, what is different about it. Is it like ours, but it's a brain? Like my logo is similar, but a coffee cup? If we go on to say that removal and testing of this controller revealed the existence of several additional settings that manipulate these cockroaches into large organized conglomerations designated -A. These formations, the size of them will vary depending on how many cockroaches are available within range, but can exceed 30 meters in length, so pretty good-sized things we got going here. When they are in this -A state, the cockroaches gain increased strength and resilience and appear to exhibit a rudimentary hive mind. Adjusting the settings cause them to manifest in different configurations, most of which resemble singular, very large cockroaches with various modifications like large pincers, battering rams, additional sets of wings, or tank turrets that launch compressed balls of cockroaches. That's fun. It was recovered after instantaneously manifesting in midair and impacting approximately 2 kilometers from Site-119. We have an addendum that says, following extensive efforts, the computer within 4878 has been decrypted. It contains detailed maps of several planets and moons, as well as detailed documents describing the genetic modification and specialized breeding of various strains of cockroaches. These cockroaches were designed with enhanced resistance to radiation, corrosive enzymes in saliva, adaptive respiratory systems, and sensitivity to radio waves. And here's our punch. All documents carry timestamps from the year 2192. End article. Now, one thing that I'll note, just as a nitpick, since we end it saying it's the year 2192 on the documents attached to this thing, is that we have been, as of late, doing a lot of works where the article is set in some point into the future. So we don't actually have maybe a definitive basis for comparison here. That is very easily solved just by just like prefacing the addendum with a date, updated 2019, July 26th, and saying these, we finally decrypted the thing and this is what we found. And oh, by the way, it's from the year 2192. It's an interesting thing. It doesn't explain itself, and I think that's quite intentional. This is quite a short work, but again, we go through this so quickly that it's almost like, okay, that's certainly a thing. And again, I don't really feel much about it. Like, it's a thing that turns roaches into big roaches, and it's presumably from the future. There's brain in a jar, but given all that, what am I to do with this knowledge? Like, and don't get me wrong, when we talk about old school works, series 1-esque works that don't insert a lot of narrative, this inserts a little more than that, because we have a lot more unanswered questions that were placed rather intentionally. But where this differs is that we don't take the opportunity to insert any sort of horror into it that would hook me and give me that series 1 in a good way sort of vibe, and that it's very short, but it's also very impactful. This isn't impactful because we don't, it's a thing that kind of does a thing. And that's a hard thing for me to get around, and this is actually also a no vote from me. Now, last but not least for the recap skips, SCP-4389-J, titled Can the Foundation Do This? By G0765. This is the high skip of the week. We have an object class, Euclid is struck through, and then we have none. You have my attention. So we have a very long set of procedures that are struck through. They indicate that it is to be stored within a hermetically sealed containment chamber within Site 19. Entry and exit must be prohibited, as they could lead to a containment breach. Level 4 or higher personnel should remain unaware of the existence of it to prevent its anti-memetic effect from manifesting. That's all struck through, and instead it says SCP-4389-J does not require containment as it does not exist. So we immediately have this conflict of, is it anti-memetic or does it actually not exist? So we describe the skip as a powerful anti-memetic anomaly, which is believed to have the physical form of a piece of medieval artillery. It presents no signs of sentience, but its anti-memetic properties necessitate a classification of Euclid, and the anomalous effect of it varies in potency depending on how long a member of personnel has been employed at the Foundation. Interesting, we have a self-referential thing going on. Junior class and D class are unable to observe it, but accept its existence when made aware of it. Site directors and members of the Overseer Council both cannot perceive of it and refuse to believe that it exists. For this reason, testing of 4389-J should only be carried out by junior researchers. And we have a collapsible that says you have one new message. And this is on Foundation letterhead, got the little logo in the background, from a site director to a junior researcher, dated November 24th, 2017, and it reads, Dr. Rossi, it's become apparent that you and several of your colleagues believe that there is a certain anti-memetic entity being contained in Site 19. This is not correct. There's nothing in the containment chamber which is seemingly designed to hold it. Testing of other members of personnel who support the existence of it has even revealed that there is no memetic or mind-altering component in this belief. You have come to this incorrect conclusion entirely of your own free will. There is nothing within that containment chamber, anomalous or not. This does not mean 4389-J has breached containment, as something cannot breach containment if it does not actually exist. I have previously sent this email to several other junior researchers who all refuse to admit that SCP-4389-J is not real. They ignored the truth, so I'm going to make it extremely clear in this message. there is no cannon. End article. I enjoyed this piece. It's it walks the line on, oh man, we did the build up to payoff. That's whenever we talk about jokes, I talk about the build up to payoff ratio, and that is the line you have to walk when you deal with with anything in writing, but I think in humor, when you have a joke and you're priming somebody and you have build up, and I really dug this payoff. This was actually controversial. A lot of the comments did not care for it. That, oh, we set up just for that. Okay. I enjoy it for what it's worth. This is, and I think most of the listeners are kind of aware of what we're getting at here, but I'll explain just for the heck of it. Because, and for that matter, I've had this argument on the SCP subreddit that people have sort of subverted the meaning of it, of there is no canon. When we say there is no canon, and this is a common refrain on the wiki, we are not laying down an authoritative canon that people have to follow just because one work portrays something in a certain way does not prevent you from portraying it in a different way, nor do we lay down as staff anything that you must or must not do. You can try just about anything you want and see what happens. You're not necessarily free from responsibility for your actions. And the further you get out from the generally accepted canonical things that have gone on the site, you do need to support it through, solid execution of the work. So that is a long buildup of a joke for a forward punchline, and it is just the right amount of dumb for me. So this actually was a +1 from me. I just remembered Aelana years ago did a work, and I think I don't remember if it was a J or a main lister, but it was about head cannons, and it was actual cannons that would grow out of your head. Anyway, that's what I got for recaps. This next bit is going to be something a little different. I haven't really done this before on this show. I have 3 other works that I'm going to talk about, and we're going to approach it from a crit perspective, and we're not going to really go into the skips from like a top-down perspective. I'm going to point out some things in works. It is more or less recommended that you have the work in front of you to kind of see what I'm talking about, and it is entirely possible that these works will incorporate some of these changes into the piece. I will be keeping archived copies of them as I saw them on the SCP Cafe wiki, which is accessible from scp.cafe. First up in the barrel is SCP-4954, Long Live the Tinsmith by Nameless Mediocre. I will start at the top here briefly, because 2 things that jump out at you right at the beginning is we have this Keter struck through and Thaumiel put in for the object class, and level 5 classified. Those 2 things both set very high stakes, and the burden is on you when you do both the thing that's level 5 classified, because that's obviously highly sensitive, and this Keter strike through into an esoteric, I almost said esoteric class. Thaumiel, I suppose at this point, is generally accepted, but when you do something like that, and I think Thaumiel still has a bit of a punch to it, you do have to really justify it. Nameless Mediocre did already address one issue that I had with the piece, which was that the number of self-replicating satellites in here, as well as the orbital task force, when you put all of these things into low Earth orbit, they exceed the number of actual honest-to-God satellites by several orders of magnitude, and it would be something that we couldn't effectively contain because any schmuck with a telescope could see exactly what's going on. We have reduced the numbers of both of them by about 2 orders of magnitude. So now we've got about 1,000 of these remote piloted craft and somewhere between 1 and 10,000 of these satellites. That's still a lot. Don't get me wrong. That's more. That may be more satellites, particularly since these are claimed to be up to 500 meters in length. then we have actual satellites in low Earth orbit, and we don't make any mention of how we are going about suppressing knowledge of these, because amateur astronomy is such a big hobby, and you can't you can't prevent people from seeing one of that many things up in the sky. You can catch them totally by accident, actually. Just by doing, if you do long exposure photography, you can end up with fixed points. I've had that happen myself, where I was like, oh, well, what was that? And then I go look it up, and like, oh, it was, this satellite or that satellite. And they're all so highly documented that this becomes hard to suspend disbelief when we have this many potentially very large satellites in orbit and we don't know anything about them. The other thing I think you could do to get around that is by setting this farther into the future, where it's understandable. Well, you don't know about them now because they don't exist right now, and maybe sometime in the future they'll be there. The document claims that all instances possess a USB mini port. The picture directly above it, that is not a USB mini port. That is USB type B, right next to what looks like to be a standard, like a 9-volt DC power connector. I'm not sure what this thing is. I see a thing on top that looks like it might be for a antenna of some sort. So it's good and inscrutable when I can't tell what it is, but if maybe there is a USB mini port and it's on the back side of this thing, but that was something that jumped out at me early on. I initially downvoted this thing on the basis of the number was too damn high, and the USB doesn't match up with what we have in the picture here, because that's something you can definitely ask people. Hey, I've got this image, it's great, can you tell me what this port is, and get the right answer. There's a line in here that says microscopic imaging of 4954 have shown parts growing out of it on the molecular level, and that doesn't sound quite right. I don't know if it's the tone of saying parts growing out of it. I'm not sure what the right verbiage would be there, but something about that just rings a little bit off. We go into this discussion of the lifespan, and we have some rather precise numbers that seem to trigger these various phases, as they're called in here, reaching 30 centimeters on the button, achieving a mass greater than 100 kilograms on the button. And that's interesting because it leads me to believe that there must be some reasoning for the precision, their creator or something about them, that it is, 100 kilograms, no more, no less. We do that and then we move on. And if that's the case, that's fine. But it's not really elaborated on sufficiently in the work to make that something that's really justified. We, how are we finding this out? Are we, noting their mass from space, from the ground? How are we weighing these things in low Earth orbit? Because from the outside perspective, you would probably, if it's, got more than 100 kilograms of mass and they're catching this sort of microscopic space junk, then what we would probably note is actually the radius or the length of it, more so than the mass of it. I've also mentioned to Nameless Mediocre my gripe with using Sanskrit for the task force. This is the Sanskrit glyph sa, and this is not something that and in their defense, they said it was because that is the precedent for orbital task forces up to this point. I said, don't encourage them. So the second addendum, where we start getting into these logs of this POI-1 and -2, I really wasn't sure how to feel about these, because it's not clear who they are, whether they are human, whether they're other satellites, how they're coming on, why, how do the satellites, why are they using MP3s? It's all a bunch of little things that are, they're questions that when you get into satellites and science and, computer science, that there's going to be nerds like me that want to poke at it and figure out why things are the way they are. If we were able to access the memory, and particularly, to the point where we can figure out, oh, these were MP3s using off-the-shelf software, that would point to, we should have a lot of information that we could glean from that. And at that point, I would want to spend time laying out who made this damn thing, because, if we're that deep into it that we can read all of the memory on these things, then we know a hell of a lot more than we ever really follow up on in the work. Overall, I found, the story is pretty enough, and I don't really feel any sort of sadness or anything like that with the destruction of this satellite at the end. It builds up and dies down too quickly. I was reminded of in Fallout 4, where you meet somebody. I'm going to try not to spoil anything, even though at this point it's been out for a while. You probably should have played it by now. You meet somebody, and they're very important to you, and you start doing these missions in support of them. And then in a very short matter of time, you can go through this in a few hours, just sitting there banging these missions out. They're gone. So it's like, okay, we set up all of the drama here of meeting this person, but it all happened so quickly that it didn't have time to really have any gravitas or real emotional impact from it. So that's kind of what I'm feeling on this piece. And as it is, it's still it's somewhere between a no vote and a +1. I'm more towards a plus than a minus, but not hooking me enough to really commit to one. I think the big thing that's holding me back is the really having to have trouble. I'm having trouble suspending disbelief with the obscene difficulty of containing something in low Earth orbit, where just about any schmuck with a $30 telescope could figure it out. And that's difficult, and I don't know what the answer is for this piece. Like I said, I think probably setting it in the near to medium-ish future would probably be what I would do given that dilemma. Next up is SCP-4168, Decomposing Love by Diana Berry. The description here, where we indicate where the people are from Lille in France. The other one, well, they're living in Lille but was born in Sheffield. These are not relevant details. They're not expanded on in the work. They should likely be omitted. There are some issues throughout the work with spacing. There are extraneous spaces in places. I would probably just Control F this thing for 2 spaces and see what happens. There's a number of them between pyrite and base here. There's other places where we need spaces and we don't have them. In this first log with the interviewer Dr. Dots, there's no space between the period in Doctor and the capital D in Dots. Begin log has an angle bracket that's backwards, and there's a number of little issues like that I would advise just picking somebody trustworthy that's got a number of highly rated things, that has the solid attention to detail and knows what to look for to make that look better from a punctuation and logging sort of perspective. We've got a little bit of redundant phrasing here. We say, starting with the heart, if either -2 is not within 2 meters, if the skip is not worn, or both. The either would mean that both is really also valid. So you could say if either -2 is not within 2 meters, or if 4168 is not worn. I don't think anybody's going to really pick you apart for that. The following line, the decay does not progress in a manner natural to non-anomalous human cadavers, is sort of it doesn't help anything if we don't explain how it differs. It just doing that leads me. I ask, well, how is it different? And it's, sort of elaborated on that. We talk about, they have abscesses covering, most of their skin. The fact that it starts from the heart might be a bit too much for the piece. I don't think at the same time that we do enough with the danger of having these abscesses and so on covering their skin. You've got that's kind of a closed system when you expose it to air, particularly once you're outside of the foundation's, gifts and clean rooms and so on. It's entirely likely you're going to catch some sort of nasty bug, and that is something that we didn't really, we could add a little bit of additional sort of body horror, visceral horror to the piece here. The dialogue is not great. Dash 2 doesn't really is not really believable. We have this line, when I got the call of her body literally fucking rotting at work, man, you bet I was furious. I'm not sure I buy that as natural dialogue. We go on, and we can kind of tell what's coming here, and we didn't actually, I think, do enough with the material that we set ourselves up for, because what we have is a fairly, and I hate to trivialize it, but we have a fairly standard story of domestic violence and domestic abuse, and Dash 1 with all of the ellipses and pauses and so on, we can tell how we're supposed to feel, and the whole thing is kind of what's the word I'm looking for? It's we can kind of see it all coming. We know kind of in advance how we're supposed to feel throughout the piece, and then this last the journal log, the diary, the prefacing it that they're letters to herself, to be nice to yourself. I think that does work. I think that's as good a way as you're going to get to justify writing documents like this, where we have this, these very personal stories coming out. Normally I have a hard time saying, understanding why these things were ever recorded, but I've seen, books and diaries and stuff like that. So I think that's actually a good vehicle for telling the story in that way. We do kind of go back to, in this last interview, I don't think we do enough here. We know Dash 2's a psycho, but we could really just deal with him. And as far as I can tell, we can just give her this ring, right? And we're good. We could be a real douchebag foundation and play on that. He's secondary to this. That we can test and try and understand this ring. Is it the ring? What is it about it? Can we, and sort of ignore that we're dealing with a person here in Dash 1 that has to deal with the consequences of our testing. Just overall, we didn't do, I think, enough with the setup, because it's very long, and then what we're left with is a fairly straightforward story of domestic violence that we end on sort of a sour, just sort of a we don't end it with any sort of closure. Just, you've really got things backwards. We don't. There's no sense of justice. There's also no sense of betrayal, maybe on the part of the Foundation, and it is just the sort of ending that it makes people, I don't want to say auto downvote, but it is not, it's not something that's going to serve the story well. People want closure. They want a resolution for the time that they put into reading the piece, and this is not sufficient in that regard. Overall, I think it needs more eyes. It needs more work with people that can help out with the dialogue, and as well as just keeping an eye on the general punctuation, spacing, and so on in the piece. Last one up for crit, SCP-4593, titled Clevair by G0765. The initial procedures and description are all really good. The tone here is great. I'm going to take a quick look through this because I didn't really see anything in here that jumped out at me as needing really any attention at all. I found this all to be quite solid. The particular cylinder you've got pictured here is called a T cylinder, if you want to be precise. What else? There's a sentence in the description, continued exposure to 4593 enhances the effect further. However, the increase in intellect displays logarithmic growth. However, doesn't seem to be the right word here because the one clause supports the other. I believe you could simply say continued exposure enhances the effect further in a logarithmic pattern. That is actually kind of hard to determine. What does that imply? How are we objectively measuring it to the point that we can quantify it and get results that are logarithmic in scale? Because for the most part, we don't have orders of magnitude of intelligence to have to make determinations upon, I think we did an okay job setting it up that this is for the most part regular air. I guess one thing is that we've explained so much that this is regular air, just a bit denser, that it's not clear to me why we couldn't get some sort of proxy in for fellow once we get into the logs here, because I feel like we should probably do something to explain why he can't get access to it. It has some thing in it, some compound, it is anomalous because of these reasons, and that is why our guy in the log can't go and get or synthesize more, because it's something that can't be synthesized, by the Foundation. I mean, the guy has access to a lot of stuff, and I never really felt like we were sufficiently explaining why it was totally not doable. You put the whole Foundation behind it, and for that matter, this guy chose poorly, which is fine, but that we didn't, that he, didn't talk to anybody about, alternatives, ways to work on a cure for his condition. I don't think that makes a ton of sense. Yes, I'm going to get in trouble, but in this case, the punishment is going to be far better than the consequences without some help. And that is ultimately what happens here. So, we are forced to conclude sort of that this guy is a bit of an idiot despite himself, because of the whole idea here is that it boosts your intelligence, but that doesn't mesh with his actions at all. So that's also sort of a challenge to explain in here. For the most part, I find these logs to be very over the top. This is, I'm going to make another Fallout reference here. You'll find these terminals out in the wild, and they're little log entries where the big bad tells you all of their evil plans, or they wax poetic about something that really should never be committed to paper, and this is very much in that vein. The dude is confessing to multiple murders, and it's never really clear why any of this is being logged, and it's a hard thing to swallow because again, the dude is supposed to be intelligent. He's not acting like it, and that, I think, works against the piece pretty drastically. So how do you do this? How do you tell the story and still have this make sense as a main lister? I think you split it. I think you chop it right at this secondary description after this addendum where we find out the problems here, I would probably split this into a tale and let this second part be done under the context of a tale rather than within the main list itself, because this is hard to swallow in this format, but I think the restrictions are quite a bit lighter when you're doing a tale, and we're going to forgive a whole lot more. Given that it's the bulk of the text in here, I think it would still work. I think you're going to have two perfectly reasonably lengthed articles, and in doing it that way, I think you avoid some of the gripes with the way that this is presented on the main list. The dude is a schmuck. When we do these logs, it's not evenly portrayed here because, like, I feel like I'm not sure how to feel about the guy. Like, I'm sorry he made this decision to sort of covertly smuggle anomalous items in for personal gain, but then he sort of throws a junior researcher under the bus and makes him deal with potentially horrific Foundation experimentation for over nearly a year, and I'm supposed to feel bad for this guy after that? Hell no, I'm not. I'm not feeling anything at all. So we spend a lot of time that we're building up, he can't get access to any of this stuff. And I'm like, good, let the motherfucker die. I couldn't care less at this point. I don't give a rat's ass if this guy lives or dies at the end of this work. And he just keeps going on, killing people and making me feel justified in saying, whatever happens here, you probably deserved it. That said, when we end this thing, I see what we're doing. We switch from proper casing to lower casing and more typos and stuff. This descent into madness that I've never had a ton of love for in this format. It is... I don't think it's the right note to really end on, but I don't know what else you could set up for. I'm not sure. It's not a mechanic that I'm really a fan of, and it's, again, I don't have sufficient empathy for the guy to really give a damn that he's dying and crazy, because he's a dick and fully deserved it. So think about what you want us to feel when you make these characters. Think about their motivations, get some backstory for them, for how they would normally behave and then how they behave under pressure, because that's what we've got here. And the reactions are, and then you're in this case, you're also going to have to think about how would they behave under pressure, but with greatly increased intelligence. Apparently 100, 1,000, 10,000 fold, there should be any number of options at their disposal to solve the problem, but we don't have that. And instead we just have this schmuck that, gets what he deserves. Now I got one last one I want to talk about from the Great Hippo. He wrote a while back your very first SCP, and it introduced this character called Skippy. It's a great little piece, and this week we had your very last SCP, and the gist of this thing is that Dado has managed to hack the Foundation and is somehow sending Comic Sans over plain text, much to the consternation of Skippy, and we determined that Dado's network card appears to be a mashed potato, to which he replies, "Is hash table. Don't worry, is secure. Added salt." God damn it, that's amazing. So, long story short, Skippy flips the fuck out, and we're left with a situation that is somewhere between Lily's 001 proposal and S. Andrew Swan's proposal, and maybe even a little bit of day breaking. And we're left with an image that I won't spoil for you, but this was one of the better works that I've seen in July. And it's currently at a well-earned plus 144 in 7 days. Very much worth your time, your very last SCP. And from there, we're going to go to the mailbag. AIS Mallard asks, are there any hubs or canons you feel are underrated and should get more reads? Yes. Yes, I do. And believe it or not, I'm not going to talk about End of Death right now because I don't think it's underrated. I think people know how good it is. So set 30 minutes aside. Under SCP Universe, pull up canons and read Ship in a Bottle. I love Ship in a Bottle. It's and I'll put it this way: I love the concept of Bottle Dick more so than I love Bottle Dick itself, because the idea of very smart people occasionally doing very silly, stupid things is something that we don't explore a whole lot in the Foundation, and it's all very well put together, and you've got some of the best writers on the site contributing to this, and it's not deep reading by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a fun little diversion, and it's one of those things that you could go a very long time not know it exists, and just be a little happier for having that as a part of your Foundation experience. Mini Meats doesn't have a question. He has a sales pitch, I suppose. He says that in the future, when the cafe store is filled out more, consider a line of diapers with the SCP logo. I could have them react to moisture to display containment breach. This idea free of charge, just credit Dotto. I'll consider it. I don't think I can do that. I make shirts and decals and stuff, and I hate kids, so diapers, that's a no from me, man. And lastly, Christian Wright asks, do you have any strong opinions on when a piece could be better written as a tale than an SCP or vice versa? Also, have you considered incorporating tales into SCP Cafe? Let me take the first one first. Not really, because for the most part, I think the voters do a good job of informing people when their skip should be a tale, and it's very rare that a tale could really fly as a skip. So between the two, we'll occasionally see, like I was discussing in that last piece I was giving crit on, you can sometimes have part of a main lister that may work better as a tale, partly because you're freer of restrictions, and also because I think generally people are a bit more lenient in their voting. In exchange, you don't get as many eyes on your work, but that is one of the things that I can see kind of making a difference. But for the most part, I don't mind. It's not often that I see a big chunk and I go, you know what, that would work better as a tale than in the main list. It happens occasionally, but not something I'm super passionate about. As for tales being on SCP Cafe, I have considered it. The biggest factor working against it is the amount of time involved in getting through everything. It's pretty commonly known that skips do get more visibility than tales. That is something that we've looked at different things to try and solve that issue. I don't know if it's a problem that can ever be fully solved, just due to the nature of SCPs and their popularity in that format. I don't think we can do anything to ever really elevate tales to the exact same tier. We can give them better visibility and better discovery, but I don't think they're ever going to be quite at that level. So that said, when I do this show, I do try to hit the big majority of fans, and that's going to be everybody keeps an eye on SCPs for the most part. There's a few edge cases and a couple of old timers that aren't really around anymore that were kind of proud to admit they only read the tales, the GOI formats, etc. That's a pretty small minority. Just about everybody keeps up with the skips, and that is a lot of my determining factor in why I came up with the recap format that I did, is because people do like reading SCPs but don't necessarily have the time to keep up with them on a weekly basis. Adding tales is one of the things I was looking at as sort of a stretch on the Patreon side of things as far as bonus content, something to rotate in and out of. Maybe like instead of a weekly recap, do like a monthly recap and talk about really interesting tales from the month. The other issue with Tails in general is that they require more background knowledge of the SCP universe generally to really work. There aren't a ton that are fully standalone that don't require background knowledge of at least another SCP, or more commonly, whole GOIs or things along those lines. When an SCP does that, we can punish it with a downvote and say, it really does need to stand on its own merits. We don't really have that going on with Tails, and that also makes them hard to discuss without having to do a lot of back and forth of, oh, well, to understand this, you need to know about these guys, and for them to really make sense and why they're the way they are, you need to know about this other SCP from back in Series 2, and so it ends up being not necessarily a great fit for this format. You can do a thing where you lay all that out for like 1 or 2 tales and call that a show, but for the recap format where we try to cover a lot of things, that's also not really what I'm going for either. So it's difficult. There is some conscious choice going on in keeping things the way they are right now. As time opens up, it's possible, but I can't commit to it right now. But that said, we are out of here. Apologies if the sound quality is not up to scratch in the middle of recording. You might have heard that one. We've had a hailstorm blow through, and it's been pinging little hail off my window. It's been overall not real pleasant to record in, so apologies. Thanks for sticking it out with me. I will see you on the Week 31 show, August 2nd, and if you thought this show was worth a buck, patreon.com/scpcafe is the best way to support me. Appreciate that. So, till then, keep reading, keep writing, and I'll see you on the other side.